especially when it comes to student financing? How can we find more equitable ways to fund learning? Maybe a controversial statement, but like what capitalism, at least the version of capitalism that we're living today, it's really based around debt. And really what Bitcoin as the first blockchain-based digital asset, or the godfather of crypto, if you like, the problem that it solved was that it allowed peer-to-peer transaction without the need for a third party to validate. Which, what does that mean? Well, it created trust.
Mo, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Great to be here, Eric. Thank you for having me. Super excited.
Absolutely. So do you want to do a quick intro for the people, kind of who you are and what you do? And then, because I think there's a lot of cool stuff that we'll get to talk about today. And for those listening who did listen to the last episode with Samir, who was maybe a little bit bearish on crypto, maybe you'll get the other side of that today. But Mo, the floor is yours. Give the people an intro.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. I'm Mohamed Ezeldin. I am the president of Open Campus Foundation and also leading up Animoca Labs within the Animoca ecosystem. A bit of background on myself. I'm a mathematician by training. I also have a degree in education. I was a high school teacher for the best part of 10 years. I'm leading a mathematics department within the UK. Got into crypto in 2017, was sent the Bitcoin white paper. The mathematician inside me, let's say, geeked out a bit in terms of the solution there, discovered ICOs, rode that wave up and down from 2017 to 2018, and sat there scratching my head mid-2018 as to why I'd round tripped, or why my portfolio was back to where it started, or maybe even worse from before, which led me down the route of token economics, where I think there was a big misunderstanding around what tokenomics actually is. Joined Animoca in 21 to found their tokenomics department, built that up from scratch, launched loads of different tokens. Probably the most notable will be ApeCoin, Pixels, Pengu, Mocha, EDU for Open Campus, amongst some others we won't talk about, but lots of learnings there. And worked on Open Campus as a core contributor and a launch partner pre-launch, and I've come back in to really be an extra aid to the team to help direct them in the right direction, given my overlapping skills from education to crypto, Web3 and token economics. I guess that's the high level intro, but again, happy to dive into anything.
Yeah.
Really.
100%. Let's for the people listening that have no clue what tokenomics is, do you want to define that just so people have kind of and maybe some of the other terms, just so people have a glossary or a kind of a definition set as we go forward in the conversation?
Oh, 100%. So the best way to think of tokenomics, if we break it down, is token economics. So really looking at the supply and demand in the most basic sense for tokens. When we think about tokens, really think of them as digital assets. And what we've seen successful in the space when it comes to digital assets, stable coins, and which I'm sure even those who are not familiar with crypto have heard of stable assets. So stable coins has been one of the biggest use cases. We've seen NFTs be quite successful use cases as well. And when we think of an NFT, the best way I like to think about it is a digital container that you can put stuff inside. What we've seen NFTs been really successful for maybe gaming assets or for profile pictures. You would have seen like the Bored Apes or the Penguins over the years as well. But what we're starting to see is this technology being used for storing data, for example, storing things such as like land deeds as well, because of the provenance that the blockchain gives. And the beauty of blockchain is that it's an open ledger. So what that means, Eric, if I was to transfer something from my wallet to your wallet, everyone would be able to see that transaction take place. And really what Bitcoin as the first blockchain-based digital asset, or the godfather of crypto, if you like, the problem that it solved was that it allowed peer-to-peer transaction without the need for a third party to validate. Which, what does that mean? Well, it created trust in a trustless environment. Whereas if, for example, Eric, you work in a coffee shop and I'm paying for my coffee, we're trusting the banking infrastructure to showcase that the money's left my account and it's hit your account. With Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, you don't need that third party, which is that banking infrastructure, to do that. So I think that was the innovation in the technology. And then since then, we've seen a lot more innovations, which we'll dive into, I'm sure, as we dive deeper into the podcast together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so before I forget, because I had several thoughts on what you said, but before I forget, we'll get the question from the last guest. And as we mentioned offline, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, you have two. Um, First one is, what made you get out of bed this morning?
Honestly and truly, my kids
Mm.
need to got them off to school, make sure they were fed. So that's the real answer. The other part, honestly, is this industry is super exciting, and every morning waking up, having gone to sleep with different ideas in terms of how can we action these ideas, how can we look at different innovative models. That's really the that's what gets me up in the bed. Oh, so it gets me up in the bed makes no sense. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, most mornings.
Fair enough, fair enough. Second one, given the heated media environment today, do you have clever ideas for how to turn the temperature down?
I mean, we'd have to probably change the way we interact with society as a whole. And the reason I say that is a lot of media companies are propaganda engines for whoever's funding that media company. So I feel that there's a fault in the actual structure when we think about media. And we see with a lot of the algorithms with X, with Instagram, with TikTok, and so on and so forth. So I feel that there needs to be a change there, just so we can have true media or real news versus a lot of the fake news or narratives that are being pushed down our throats.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about that is that kind of logic I think applies also to the financial system in terms of the structure and being I don't know if unstable is the right word, but people are losing trust in a lot of the institutions, whether it's media, financial, medical, in some way, shape, or form. And so I want to dive back into what you mentioned about the peer-to-peer transaction and the trust and the trustless kind of transaction. So for me, what's super interesting about Bitcoin and the blockchain is one of the things that maybe the detractors of crypto might say is there's no inherent value. It's just a number on a screen. Like if you turn all the computers off, doesn't matter, it's not there anymore. Um, but I think the inherent value really lies in what you just said, that peer-to-peer transaction and the ability to move money and have the ledger be completely open and transparent. And I think that's where the store of value lies. But I want to get your take on that, on maybe the detractor side of saying, well, if you just turn the computers off, it doesn't actually matter. And NFTs are just, why can't you just screenshot the picture of the ape or whatever, and then I have it too, and all these things where people say like, yeah, maybe it's just a fad, and then it'll go away. Um, because if you look at like sound money principles, it's not like the banks are following those either. So. What I mean, for those, I'm sure you've been in those conversations before. How do they usually go from your end?
So when we think about the relative price of something, there tends to be consensus. So when we think of the price of gold, there's consensus that this is the price of gold. And when there's maybe a breakdown in belief in the existing monetary systems, then we tend to see the price of gold spike because there's more demand for gold. And the reason I start with that is Bitcoin in essence is very similar. While gold is physical, and we know that there's an inflation rate of maybe, I think was it 12% or either 2 or 3% or 12 or 13%. Don't quote me on that just yet. Of gold per year coming into existence. Bitcoin is similar in the sense that, yes, it's a digital version of gold. To your point, it's a store of value. But where is that value derived from? A, it's from the technology in terms of that it's trustless, but also that there's consensus that Bitcoin has this value from all of the different stakeholders. Now, when we look at the stakeholders, 5 or 6 years ago, your big banks, your JP Morgans were saying crypto's a scam, stay away. These same banks today have their own crypto trading desks. We're seeing ETFs being passed for people to be able to buy Bitcoin. We're seeing other ETFs for other cryptocurrencies such as Ethereum and Solana and others. We've seen new vehicles called digital asset treasuries, which is fundamentally Nasdaq listed companies buying crypto and putting it on their balance sheet. I think that the first to do so was MicroStrategy with Michael Saylor, I think
Hmm.
2 or 3 years ago, as of 2.5 years ago, as of now, and we're seeing that becoming more of a trend with other companies wanting to put different crypto assets on their balance sheet. So I think like even though we've reached consensus, what we're also seeing there's been a mindset shift from the institutions towards digital assets and cryptocurrencies. Again, being led by Bitcoin, but it's now filtering down to other cryptocurrencies. To the other point, and like the NFT argument is always hilarious. I can just right click and save a picture. Well, absolutely right. I mean, I can right click and save a picture. We were speaking about football offline earlier, or soccer to those in the US. The
Oh,
largest game.
we could call it football. Don't
Oh,
worry.
I love it. There we go. I always have a thing with calling it soccer. It pisses me off. But anyway, that's the British, the Britishness coming out. But when it comes to football, the biggest game around football is FIFA. And well, I can have my ultimate team. I can right click and copy someone else's card, but I get none of the feasibility or usability or ownership of that card or of that player to then be able to trade, to sell, and so on and so forth. So I might be able to right click and save and use it as my profile picture, but I have none of the ownership that comes along with it. And I feel it's a very similar argument with NFTs. You might right click and save my ape, but I'm the only one who has ownership of the ape, which means I'm the one who can actually sell that ownership rights in the form of it being an NFT. But I also, through that, have the rights to any licensing or anyone who wants to use the IP of my ape as well, because there's provenance of ownership on chain, which just means you can prove who has ownership of this IP. And again, going back to an NFT being a digital container, you can place anything inside it. We've seen the first use cases were profile pictures and game assets, but we're seeing that expand to a host of things we're calling RWAs or real world assets as well
Mm.
that can be tokenized.
So that's interesting because so first to your first point about companies putting crypto on their balance sheets, also countries have been doing that as well. So El Salvador did it, the US has done it or at least looked into it. Um, what would you say to the people that are worried that crypto or NFTs or the blockchain is there then a way to, right? I'm sure you've heard the term like central bank digital currency and these sorts of things to whether it's the social credit score type theory or something like this. What would you say to those people who are concerned that crypto will then be turned into a tool of control by governments when the essence of crypto is the opposite of that, right? Yacht was on the show and he talked all about like ownership of data rights and digital property and things like that. And if it can just be turned into basically the polar opposite of that, what would your response be to the people that are concerned about that?
So in the simplest sense, a central bank digital currency or CBDC is controlled by the central bank. So there is that centralized ownership. And what that means is that, assuming this is live, is I might have some funds in my account, and tomorrow I wake up and some of those funds or all of those funds are gone or they're locked because I do not have ownership of that. So actually, it's to your point, violating what crypto stands for from an ownership standpoint. Whereas if I own my assets outright, then no one can block my assets or take control of my assets. So I feel that's a big differentiation there instantly, is they're using some of the primitives that blockchain enable. But at that point, it's no longer a permissionless blockchain. It becomes a permissioned blockchain, which is not decentralized. And permission because there are certain permissions for you to be able to access um, that chain. Or in this case, when I say chains, think of it as an operating system. It's probably
Mm,
the best parallel to make. So if a bank has its own operating system, they're in control of the operating system of the updates of who has what within their balance versus it being permissionless. It's I have ownership, which also means no one else can impact what's in my wallet or in my account. So I feel that's high level one of the bigger differences. I feel the other aspect, and I think that the answer is slightly different depending if you're someone living in the West or in a developed nation versus a developing economy. And the biggest aspect there is we have a lot of the banking infra for us in Europe, in the US, it's ready. And there isn't really much room for improvement. I mean, you can argue against that, but in terms of how seamless it is as of today, it's great, unless you're doing international remittance. And we've seen a lot of headache around that. And where we've seen actually in a lot of developing economies, that and even some of the neobanks, I was reading a research piece around the use of stable coins, and a lot of your neobanks, Revolut included, are actually using stable coins on the back end. So when you're transferring funds, those funds are being transferred using stable coins on the back end, even if the front end user experience, it's showcasing pounds, it's showcasing euros or dollars. A lot of the back end and internal transactions are happening using blockchain technology as of now. Why? It's faster, almost instantaneous, but also it's cheaper. And when we're thinking about international remittance, it can take anywhere from a few working days up to 30 working days, without getting too much into the process of what international remittance looks like. I think the other aspect that crypto has enabled is actually cross-border community building. And what I mean by that is we tend to be stuck when we think about community building based on our physical or jurisdictional locations from that aspect. What crypto has allowed, and when I use the term crypto, I use it loosely. I mean tokens, I mean NFTs, I mean other forms of digital assets, is you've allowed communities with like-mindedness to then build around that, regardless of where someone is located. So, like me and you are football fans, but if I'm playing football, I'm here in the UK, I'm forced to play within my locality. Likewise, with you, you're forced to play within your locality. But if there's a football project that then brings us together, regardless of where we are internationally, or because of that underlying love for sport, underlying love for football. So that's then a community that brings us together. I think probably the most successful we've seen this, you can argue, is Bitcoin, because people, like every country in the world, you have someone who owns Bitcoin. NFTs as well. We saw a few years back with the rise of Bored Apes as the main IP. Within the space, you had a 10,000 collection, which meant it was an exclusive club, and it was designed in that way to be exclusive. Of all of these people who were part of this club, and well, what do you get for being part of the club? Well, you get access to Ape Fest, which is a music festival once a year. I think this year was held in Vegas. Last year was held in Lisbon. The year before was held in Hong Kong. So it's quite an international music festival or community festival, bringing the communities together. What we also saw as an extension of that, it wasn't just a festival, but in its own right, people who own the IPs of the Bored Apes were creating businesses around the IP. Some of these businesses includes food and beverage. So we have Bored and Hungry, which has a number of different stores in Asia. We have others creating snacks. We have others creating in-game items around the IP of their apes. So we're starting to see different business ventures that are launching. And now you have, back to Ape Fest, you not only have this festival, but you also have an opportunity for the community to showcase the business or the businesses that they've launched. And it's a coming together of thousands of people every year. And you can think of it as a private members club from that aspect. So there's another example of where crypto or digital assets through ownership, but also through being cross-border, have allowed communities to build to specific IPs or specific thought processes. And there's so many more. These are just a couple of examples.
So you're not particularly concerned with government kind of overreach or tentacles getting into these sorts of things?
I'm very concerned, and the reason I am is actually there's a lack of financial literacy that exists worldwide today. And what that means is that we don't understand money, we don't understand ownership. And because of the lack of understanding we have, and this is a blanket statement as of now, and there are exceptions to this, but in general, because we lack the understanding and there isn't that consensus around we should own our data, we should own our financial assets. The other side of it is then, well, I'm just going to follow what the government says because that's been mandated. That's what everyone else is doing as humans. There's a very big element of the herd mentality as well. So if I see all of my friends are adhering to something new, by default, I'm going to adhere to something new. I think a great example of that is probably over COVID with the vaccines. Everyone was taking vaccines. So everyone just by default, okay, my parents are taking it, my friends are taking it, my partner's taking it, I'm going to take it as well. There was that herd mentality. Even though a year later, a year and a half later, we saw that a lot of these vaccines actually shouldn't have been given out. And there's a lot of challenges and health effects or side effects that are coming out from these
Yeah,
vaccines.
I got a lot of crap for that from people, and then I ended up kind of caving a little bit because we had to fly, and then I regretted it almost instantly. Not because anything happened to me, but like I took a lot of crap from people for
For
anyways.
not being
Yeah.
vaccinated. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's exactly that. And it's a double-edged sword. It can work for you or against you. And coming back to financial literacy, if people don't understand the value of what it means to own their data, to own their assets, then CBDCs become a real threat. And to your point, governments extending their tentacles becomes a real threat because people think, oh, excellent, it's going to be regulated now. This is great. There's not going to be any more scams. And they're not wrong in that thought process. But then the other side of it is, well, if we're moving from the pound to a digital pound or from a dollar to a digital dollar, and all of a sudden, I don't know, I get a speeding ticket So half of my savings account is slashed as a disincentive. That's not fair. That doesn't make sense. And I feel, to your point, it's sometimes it's too late when people realize I shouldn't have made that decision, but I only made it because everyone else was making that decision. So it comes back to that financial literacy layer as well. I feel one of the other challenges is we've seen so much negativity around crypto over the years. And coming back to the first question that one of your members left last time in terms of the media side of things, it really depends what the propaganda machine is feeding us. Is it feeding us crypto is good and it's an enabler? Or is it feeding us that this is the devil, this is a scam, keep your money away? Because that then does have a big impact on people's mindsets towards cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets, and so on.
Yeah, what's interesting about that in particular, the kind of what we're getting fed in terms of what crypto is or isn't, is there used to be maybe like 30 years ago or so, or 40 years ago, there used to be people that were like, I'm never going near the stock market. It's all a scam. I'm keeping my money under the bed in like pillowcases or whatever. And now if you're not in the stock market, you're going to get left behind because of the inflation rates anyways. So like and just investing is like staying even, which is a crazy statement to make anyway. Like it's crazy that we're in this spot now, but it feels like well, you were super early onto crypto, but it still feels like crypto's in the early stages really where you've got I wouldn't even call it mass adoption, but people still they just know of it as a fad or of like they've heard one of their crazy friends talk about Bitcoin or something like that. And so for you being way early back in 2017, 18 type time frame, how have you seen this evolve? Because and the reason I want to ask that is because there's lots of things that are the media cycle is going so quick now. So you've seen lots of cycles of crypto's a scam, Bitcoin's going to the moon, everyone should buy it. Bitcoin's a scam again, and recently sentiment's not been so great, right? Because gold took a run, and then everyone was like, "Well, why didn't Bitcoin go?" And then you've got half the Bitcoin crypto people saying, "Oh, just wait till 26 and then it'll boom," and then the other half are like, "Oh, it's going back to zero or whatever." So you've seen lots of cycles and boom busts and media telling people to or not to or whatever it is. How have you kind of processed that, stayed the course maybe over the course of all these things? You probably had some people in your personal life that say, "Oh, you had a great job. You were the head of mathematics at this school, and now you're going to go to this thing. What are you doing?" So how have you kind of processed all that?
It's honestly great questions. I have two different thought processes. The first one, you're right, we haven't hit critical mass. What we have here is a saturation point of people coming into the industry for the belief in what blockchain enables, which is decentralization, which is ownership, and so on and so forth. So I feel that that's the first part. We have the believers in what the technology enables, but what we've also seen since I've come into this industry to where we are today, the industry has matured, or the technology more specifically has matured so much that we're at a point now where we can build front end applications, which is leading to my second point, where we should be focusing on the user experience, not on the technology. When someone's downloading a Snapchat, a TikTok, an Instagram, they're not downloading it because of what technology it's built on. They're downloading it because their friends are there. There's a smooth user experience. There's network effects. Again, there's that herd mentality. It solves a problem for them, or it perceives to solve the problem up for them, which is connectivity, fundamentally. So for me, we have the technology ready that we can build these user experiences and these apps, if you like, or as we call them in the industry, dApps. The D just stands for a decentralized, so a decentralized app. But what we shouldn't be selling is what the technology enables, because again, we've hit that saturation point. What we need to be selling is an experience, is this solves this problem that you might have. And then once people are onboarded and they start realizing actually, oh, I mean, it might be a new game and my profile or my in-game items are NFTs and I unlock a one-on-one skin and I realize, well, this skin's worth 10K. I can actually trade this on the secondary market and get 10K. At that point, it doesn't make a difference what the technology is, but it enables me to monetize. because I have ownership of my assets. And I feel that's what we're not doing in the industry. It's let's stop selling what the technology enables and let people discover that through experience themselves. So that's an example of what that could look like. But that's where I feel the industry needs to be headed. Also, when we're seeing a lot of these apps launch, they're building in no man's land. And what I mean by that is you have two very distinct user bases. You have the traditional user base and you have your crypto user base. And the mindset is very different. And they're building these applications for mainstream, but they're getting adoption from crypto. And there's a big mismatch there because they're marketing to crypto. So I feel that unless it's a crypto native product, that makes sense. But if it's a social media product, if it's, I don't know, music licensing, if it's putting your educational certificates on chain so they're verified, they become verifiable credentials, regardless of what that app allows you to do, it needs to be packaged in a way that an everyday person can come in, sign in with Google or with Twitter or just with email, and then begin using a platform like they would any other platform. For me, that's the next phase for us to be able to actually reach adoption versus financial literacy. You get to own your assets. Like we know this is what the technology enables, but the majority of people don't care as of now.
Yeah.
They've been exposed to so much negative sentiment that once you've already made your mind up that something is bad, trying to convince someone that it's good isn't going to work.
Yeah, no, that's very difficult, 100% to do that. And you have to be very delicate with how you do that. Often it takes lots of time and like one-on-one and proof and all these other things that
And
don't
very large
people,
marketing
yeah.
budgets. Well.
Um, to your point on selling a skin for 10K, even like playing FIFA, there's been FIFA accounts sold for thousands and thousands of dollars. But like, oh, we've got the greatest Ronaldo or Messi card or whatever, and all these icons, and so the account is going to sell for $10,000 on whatever. And that's been a thing for some time. So much that back in the like the early days of Ultimate Team, there was like pink slips and these sorts of things that EA Sports took out of the game because it was they called it like gambling, and so they took it out of the game. So that's been like the secondary market kind of selling of game assets has been a thing for a long time, which I found very interesting then. Um, and to your point on the financial literacy piece, yeah, it's gonna take time because it's also confusing for people, and people when things are confusing, that then they take one look and their brain turns to like the static TV back from 1970 and it's like, you know what, I don't care about it anymore and they don't it's tough to learn. So it has to be super digestible. Real quickly actually, I just thought of this the difference between like layer 1 and layer 2 crypto assets. What is that? Because I've seen so on Coinbase, sometimes they'll shoot you notifications and it'll be like, "Oh, this is a layer one," and I have no idea what that is. So not to completely derail the conversation, but I just thought of that. So can you describe for people listening what that is and what it means?
Absolutely. So a layer one, let's think of it, this is your main blockchain or your main operating system. What a layer two does is that it optimizes for certain aspects that the layer one isn't optimized for, which is normally speed. So for Bitcoin, for example, it takes 10 minutes for a transaction to go through. Ethereum can take 30 seconds for a transaction to go through, but it might be expensive if you're trying to push your transaction to the front of the queue. Um, and transaction again, it might be sending digital assets, it might be receiving, it might be doing some form of staking. I don't want to get too technical, so we don't lose the audience. But what a layer two, think of it as a mini operating system that plugs into the main operating system that optimizes for something. And normally it's either optimizing for speed or it's optimizing for how cheap something can be for price.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Okay, so to circle back to the financial literacy piece and in that sort of piece, how has your background in education helped you with that? And I do want to start though with why you went into education in the first place. Math, I think for me at least, just talking to you seems fairly self-explanatory. You like numbers and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of things you can do with math, right? You can go in the physics routes, you can go the computer science route, you can go the education route, you can go lots of different routes that you went with that. What about education made it, what about that was interesting to you?
So, funnily enough, education was never my first pick. So, I graduated with a first class honors. I went straight into finance, and I quit in my second week. I realized this is not what I want to spend the rest of my life doing, and I was lucky that I realized that very early on. But I just saw that it was less around work ethic. It was more around the kind of person you become being in those rooms and being, again, part of that network, if you like. And for me, raised as I'm a practicing Muslim, I'm raised as a Muslim, and for a big part of our religion is actually how can you add value. And I felt being in the finance, it was the exact opposite. This wasn't about adding value. This was purely around extracting value. So that there was a big misalignment from that perspective. So I quit. I didn't know what to do, and I went back and did my master's. Finished my master's, and actually, you mentioned physics. Part of my master's, I studied a few astrophysics modules
Mm,
as well, in terms of like the Big Bang, dark matter, things like that, like the early stage of the universe. Partly because I found it super interesting, and partly because it was the maths behind it was quite straightforward. In terms of at least what the maths came down to was really straightforward. Some beautiful equations come out. But I quit my well, not I quit. I finished my master's, and I still don't know. I still don't know what to do. So I was consulting with friends, with a couple of people that I consider mentors. And once, like, from breaking down my skill sets, something that kept on coming up, that I was really good at taking complex ideas and breaking them down. And this was something when I was studying mathematics at uni. I was one of the people that, like, my friends would go to. All right, how can you explain this? Like, we get this, but we don't understand that, and I'd enjoy explaining it. So education was something I always had an affinity to, and it just came to be that, okay, well, actually, you don't know what you want to do next. Education is something that's very value additive to society as well, which was in alignment. And mathematics is something that, if you enjoyed mathematics, the likelihood is you had a good teacher at school, or a teacher that engaged you. If you didn't enjoy mathematics, it's because the teacher wasn't engaging. So that was another reason why I can actually spread the love for problem solving and mathematics. So that's what led me down the education route. But it wasn't like from a young age, I've
mm,
come from a family of teachers, and I want to be a teacher. That I have an aunt, I have two aunts actually who are teachers. So maybe there's a bit of that, but it was never the dream growing up to
yeah.
yeah.
But you just have that, you have that way of, I'm very similar. People are always asking me to coach football or to do like it's just seems to be something that always pops up um in my life, and I imagine it's kind of like you said, it was similar for you. And to your point about if you don't like math, you didn't have an engaging teacher. I think that probably speaking from people that I know and kind of what I know about the schools here, at least, that's a not it's a big issue. And part of that is the compensation of the teachers, I think, at least in the US. And I don't know if it's similar in the UK, but like for me, the whole way that the US does education is like just backwards. It's like completely wrong. And we've seen in the US there's been a big rise in homeschooling and like Montessori schools and different style and that sort of thing. So I think that's positive. But I mean, as you know, the financial impacts of those things can be expensive. Then maybe both parents, you need the income to make ends meet and things like that. And so you're sometimes left with no choice. And it's a big, I don't know. For me, it's I don't have kids yet, and that's something that I'm extremely worried about is how to make sure that like how to solve for that. Um, so I don't, is it similar in the UK, that sort of situation?
It's very similar in the UK. I mean, there's some differences naturally, but there's a lot of parallels as well. I mean, if we zoom out, two of the oldest institutions we have worldwide are education and finance. And you
Hmm.
can argue they're the two institutions that need the most iterating and upgrading, but more so in education. I find it shocking that what I was being taught as a student was more or less the same content, bar one or two small changes, that I was teaching 20 years later or 15 years later as a teacher. The other aspect is, with the rise in technology, and more recently with AI as well, what we're seeing is a big mismatch from people graduating university and being being employable because they don't have the underlying skill sets that are needed. Whereas before it was around the knowledge, now it's less about knowledge and more around skill sets. I've read so many different articles in terms of how AI are going to kill all of these jobs. I mean, I believe part of it, like a lot of the white collar jobs, especially at the graduate level, we're already seeing disappearing. Um, and with the rise in AI, and worth thinking, also not worth thinking, from what I've read, like agentic AI is going to be here anytime between 2027 and 2030
Hmm.
as well. So and the reason I mention that is this is unprecedented for us in general, but specific to education as well. Because not only does it impact what we're teaching in schools, and I think we've seen a number of countries come out and say, all right, we have to be AI native in our education. I think the US made that announcement a couple of months ago. We've seen other countries make that announcement as well, that they're really heavily altering the curriculum to make sure that it's AI focused. So I feel that's a step in the right direction. But it's also what are the core skills that we're teaching for? Because as of today, do I need someone to be able to do, I don't know, data analysis to the highest level? Probably not, because we have the tooling for that. But do I need someone who understands data structures so they can do the data analysis? Probably, yes, we do, to make sure that whoever's leveraging AI. And I see AI mainly as a tool, but for others, maybe they see it as the end versus the means to the end, which is slightly tangential to what we were discussing. But the other side of it is, especially at the university level, is the financing or loans for education. This is a big problem in the UK. I think that the US accounts for about 50% or just under 50% of all student loans worldwide. I think it's a market expected to grow to 4 trillion by the end of the decade. It's about 3.3, 3.4 trillion as
Hmm.
of approximately 2 trillion of that debt comes from the US. I was reading an article a couple of days ago that there was a recent change and a lot of students are actually defaulting on their loans as of now. So the way the system works actually doesn't work at all, where students are taking loans to go and get an education and they're struggling to find work and they're graduating with so much debt that it's not conducive to growth and it's not great from an economic perspective for a country in terms of their GDP and unemployment rates as well, and the debt rate. So I feel that there's something broken there. But the deeper reason for that really is that we're in a hyper capitalistic mindset, in terms of where society is, especially in the West. And this is just a consequence of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know about the defaulting thing because I think in the US, student loans are one of the ones that you can't default on, which makes it very not ideal. Um,
There was a change recently. So there was a change
okay.
recently. I'll share something with you afterwards as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe we
yeah.
can include that. I'll share that with you as well. But there was a change recently, and I think that the first set of repayments had to be made last week. And there was as you can imagine, a high number of defaults on
Yeah, I
those.
mean, I'm sure. And the other crazy part about that is like half, I mean, a big part of that problem, at least in my eyes, is the government subsidies of those loans. So the universities can charge whatever they want because they know that they'll get it back, whether the student pays it or the government pays it in some way, shape, or form. And when you look at that as a lot of things are like this where like okay, yeah, you don't want the universities to go out of business, and so you're gonna make sure that they're okay and these sorts of things. And eventually over time it becomes kind of twisted into the system that we have now. You're exactly right. The system is completely broken. If I go to school to get a job, I should one be able to get the job because I studied something that adds value to the marketplace. And two, I shouldn't be in a mountain of debt to where I like if I don't get the job, I'm screwed because of whatever thing it is. And so you've got a whole generation of people that are saying, okay, well, I went to school and I did all the right things and now I got my degree and now I don't have a job and I'm in 250 grand worth of debt. Now what? And for as a society, that doesn't bode well for the future because these people will end up in their 30s and 40s and angry and bitter and it's just like it's just not a good like it just like if you're building a society, that is the opposite of what I would do, honestly, for if you want a productive society. So yeah, there's a lot that has to go on there to fix that. And I had a guy running for US Congress um on the show a while back. And his interpretation was that this is not the problem. And I had a we had a disagreement on the show. And so to me, it's like, okay, well, if that's the view of what's going on in Congress or for people running for Congress, then that's also not great either. So, anyways, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there's a lot to be done about education and that sort of thing. And I've got people that I know that are teachers at kind of the elementary school. So for you, it would be primary school, primary secondary school level that graduated from college with me, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm done. I don't get paid enough. I'm gonna go do something else." And then the teachers who are left with like 40 kids in their class, and it's just it just keeps spiraling. So to circle back to you from that perspective, is that why you left? Is similar sort of circumstance for why you left, or did you find the opportunity in the crypto space to be kind of too alluring to turn down?
It was a mix of both. It was more the case of I'm in a position where I can have more of an impact right now. Having been in education for 10 years, your impact is limited to the students you have exposure to over the course of of a semester, over the course of a year, let's say, or the time you're in that school. And that doesn't scale because as people, you cannot scale as a teacher. I can only teach one class at any given moment in time. I can't teach five. So that was probably the main reason is that I can have an impact. I can have a deeper impact. And I think something like maybe a controversial statement, but like what capitalism, or at least the version of capitalism that we're living today, it's really based around debt. A lot of
Hmm.
what we do is debt based. And this is my own
I don't
personal,
think that's controversial at all. I just think that's true.
but I think that the next statement is, and this is my own view, not that of the company whatsoever, is that actually this is modern day slavery. Like this is how we're enslaved through the debt that we're in, because you're forced to think, how am I repaying this debt? Or I get a paycheck, and here in the UK, any loans that you own specific to education, so your student loan, it comes out of your paycheck. And the same time it comes at the same time your taxes come out of your paycheck. So what we have in the UK is you get two different numbers. You get the number you should be getting paid, then you have your deductions, or we have national insurance, tax, student loans, and then you get another number which you are paid. And it tends to be a big differential, normally 50% between what you should be getting paid pre-tax and what you get paid post-tax and post-contributions and paying for your student loans. So I feel that's part of the challenge there as well, is that because we're in a debt-based economy, it's not conducive to growth. And what we've seen is things, or historically, with any fall of civilization, it always starts with the fall of the economics and of currency. And we're seeing that happen again. If it's with the dollar, if it's with the euro, if it's with the yen, if it's with the pound. The difference is today, because of technology, we have everyone is addicted to a device of some sort, and we're able to send so much signaling, if you like, through social media that we care, or maybe we care is the wrong word. We have less, what's the best way? The signal to noise ratio is too high at that
Hmm.
point. That's so much noise that you miss the signal completely. And I feel that's where we're at as a society. And as a consequence of that, education is where it is today.
Yeah. Let's talk about the debt slavery thing because I don't disagree at all with that. Um, and I think it ties back into the financial literacy piece of when if you have parents that understand how finance works and how the banks work, for instance, like when you go to the bank and you deposit something there, they lend it out. The bank doesn't have the money. And so the money just gets created out of thin air when the next person goes and asks for a loan, essentially. They might have some fraction of a reserve in there, um, or they might not, depending on to be honest, it doesn't actually matter how much is in there.
It really doesn't.
The point is it's not enough for us, whereas everyone comes back and wants their money, they don't have it. And so we all pretend that it's there as like a socially beneficial kind of the way I heard it described in a succinct way was a socially beneficial Ponzi scheme. So
I love that definition. I
yeah.
might that.
So so if you have parents who are financially literate and they understand how debt works, and then you can go and get your degree without having to go into that mountain of debt. Debt inherently can be used as a tool right? We see this a lot with very wealthy people. They'll take out loans against assets that they have, and then therefore they are mitigating risk for themselves. They don't have to liquidate, they don't have to pay capital gains tax, they don't have to do all these other things. And this does not have to be um kind of exclusive to people who have oodles and oodles of money that they're just buying yachts for fun. Debt can be used as a tool, right? For example, if you buy a house and you don't put that much down and you save that money that you don't put down and you invest it into the stock market, you have used debt as a tool because the percentage return that you'll make back on your investment, generally speaking, at least in the US currently, is going to be higher than the interest that you pay on your mortgage. And so you'll make a little bit because you have that extra coming in every month because of how it's structured. Now, where it becomes a problem is exactly what we've been talking about the whole time when people don't understand how it works. And then it turns into exactly what you described, where you need the paycheck to come in, otherwise the government's going to come take you away because you didn't pay your debt. And that's where it becomes a super big problem. Um, and so again, to tie it back, this is the education of the financial literacy piece has been something a lot of people have come on the show and talked about. Um, and to that end, and we've talked about this with media as well, in terms of the institutions, a lot of it comes down to one, like you said, there's too much noise, but if you can cut through the noise and people have responsibility for what they're consuming, their own financial literacy, those sorts of things, there are paths, viable paths to be very successful in the way that the world is set up right now. The problem is sorting through what's BS and what it is not. Um, is that
Appreciate
how
that.
you take it as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, I see it in a very similar light. I think one thing to add to that, especially from like one of the benefits of being in a position that I'm in is being able to travel. And nothing opens up your eyes as traveling does because you just see how other countries, how other communities, how they function, how they work together as individuals, but also as a community. And one of the things that stood out is that in the US and in the West, that there's been a big rise in individualism in terms of me, how does it benefit me? Whereas what we see more in the East, and that's like the Far East, the Middle East to a degree as well, it's more centered around the us and the community. And just through that mindset, there it then has implications on how we think about money as well and how we think about value. So I feel that's one of the challenges that exists, at least where you can say there's an East-West divide, and you can say by extension, democracy is is how can I put it? Democracy is part of the problem to a degree. And the reason I say that is when we try to look at change or meaningful change, if you're having new elected officials coming in every 4 years, or assuming someone wins 2 terms every 8 years, it's actually short-term thinking because you're not planning for the next 10, 20, 30 years. You're planning to make sure that here is my mandate, here is my agenda for me to be elected, and I need to try and hit some of these short-term goals. And what that ends up doing is actually polarizing people. So that's why you've seen the woke on the left and the rise of the far right um, on the right hand side of the spectrum in politics. And that's been prevalent where more than anywhere else, Europe and the US.
Hmm.
Whereas, and this isn't what I don't want us to get into is a philosophical debate around or is democracy the best form of governance. It's just the status quo as we see it
It's just
today.
the least
Um,
bad of all governments.
yeah, to a degree, but now we're seeing with this form of hypercapitalism we have matched together, it's actually not the best form of governance because the economics become extractive, and on the political area it becomes extractive as well. So
Hmm.
who loses? We lose as the electorate, if you like, or as I say,
Yeah.
every people. We're the ones who end up losing. Who wins? Big businesses win. Why big businesses today, the multinational corporations, they have more power than governments. Like if we were to judge them with a GDP, they'd have a GDP bigger than most countries.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about like your Alphabets, your Rothschilds, and so on and so forth. And again, it's you have four companies controlling around 92% of all of the money in the stock exchange in the US, which is insane when you think about it. No wonder it continues to go up.
Hmm. Yeah. And then of course that the follow on for that is people at the individual level feel like they've been shafted by the institutions and then they start to care more about themselves, which is I think a natural kind of progression of how that works. So I mean, yeah. Anyways, not to go down this rabbit hole again, but okay, so you're teaching, you decided that you want to do something else, the tokenomics and get into the crypto Web3 space. How is your kind of family reacting to this? Because I'm sure that speaking from my own experience and from people that I know, when you have maybe a stable path and you want to go into even just entrepreneurship, you get a lot of like, oh, are you sure the stable paycheck, but what about this? And how are you going to make ends meet and blah blah blah. And did you get a lot of that jumping into that space? Because 2018 is early, really early still.
I've like again coming from Arab parents, there's in general there's an expectation that you're going to go into medicine, engineering, law, something along those lines. I wanted to be a doctor, and it was actually my parents who were like, actually, we don't think you should be a doctor. They were very anti like the standard mindset you'd expect of parents. And so when I decided to study mathematics, they were very supportive. And in the same vein, when I decided to leave education to pivot into this, they were very supportive as well, because this is something that you want to do. This is something that's going to make you happy, as long as you've thought this through. And as opposed to it being, no, you should do this, it more became, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?
Mm.
Because the whole making me aware of my unknowns in terms of making a decision like this, so I can make the most informed decision. So I was very lucky from that perspective that again, family, or at least my parents, didn't think in a traditional sense. Otherwise, probably would have got a lot of headache for sure.
So okay, so talk to me about the first couple roles you've had, because again I'm scrolling on the LinkedIn and it looks basically like you've gone straight into tokenomics.
Yeah,
So tokenomics is something that I mean, we talk about stable coins and things like that and NFTs. This has been a maybe last 2, 3 years, at least more widespread sort of phenomenon. Again, not to continue to harp on the very early adoption of it, but you're in ICP in 2018, right?
yeah.
I think ICP just had a bit of a boom the last maybe 6 months or so, and I think it's fallen a little bit back down. But you're in very, very early adoption. So how are you to kind of tie it back to the one of the questions that I asked before about kind of staying the course over the booms and the busts and no, I don't know, is this for real? Is this not for real? Is things zeroing out? Like, how are you kind of coping with that from the standpoint of, and I don't know where you're at with like family things, like your own family, kids and things of that nature, but when kids come into the equation, then of course, then that's a different calculus. You're like, okay, I got to put food on the table now. When whether it's just you can kind of be like, yeah, I'll eat some ramen for a week straight and it's fine.
Facts. Yeah, I mean, like the company I work for, Animoca, is one of the biggest in the space. So when the opportunity came across, it wasn't the first time I'd had an opportunity to transition or to leave teaching to move into the crypto space, but it was always as either as a co-founder or something where there was more inherent risk that's there. When I did make the transition in 21, um, at that point I have 3 kids now. At that point I had 2 kids. So it was I'd gone through the headache, if you like, of having kids and making sure I have a stable income through my teaching. And I was moving into another role with a stable income from that perspective as well. So there wasn't that much worry. But then on the other side, from the evolution of tokenomics and the market cycles, being a mathematician, every token we've launched has been a hypothesis test. This is our hypothesis, this is the research that we've done, and this is why we think it will be successful. And over time, and what we've seen, especially the last few years, we've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of tokens launching, the majority of which have gone to zero, but a few haven't. And it's those few, some of which we've designed, some of which others have designed, those fews where you can start to see where there's product market fit, where there's true usage. So it's also a time game, if you like. And now that enough time has elapsed, there's a much better understanding of what a good token economy looks like. But then to take a step back, really what we're designing for is value. How can you attribute and distribute value based on value creation? And as humans, specifically, or from a behavioral mindset perspective, especially with crypto, when we think of value, we think of purely the financial value. But in reality, there's so much that there are other types of value that are there as well. You can have symbolic value. What's a symbolic value that I don't know, valedictorian of my year group at university. There may be some monetary value because I'm placed in a role that someone else wouldn't get because I've graduated with the highest honors, but it's also a flex. Like I can flex and say I was the number one on my course. That's a different form of value that you have. We have, I think that what other kinds of value do we have? We have the value of like NFTs. If I hold a Bored Ape, all of a sudden from a social aspect, that has value in social circles. Similar with watches. Like if I don't know if the new Patek comes out and I'm wearing that, that has value outside of the financial value of the watch that showcases I'm a watch connoisseur, for example. I'm not, but it's an example of different types of value. And I feel when we're designing token economies, it's not just looking at the financial value, but looking at where else is value created. And that's as an industry, we focus too much just on the financialization and the tokenization aspect, not on other forms of value. So I feel, I mean, what's funny? That's been the evolution of token economics over time with those that have withstood the test of time. And you can argue Bitcoin is the epitome of all of that because the value is social, it is symbolic, it is financial as well. It has all of the different types of value you want. And it's how can we create economic frameworks that tap into these different types of value when actually the financial or economic value is at the heart of it, but we have to include other types of value as well.
That makes total sense. One of the things that I was thinking, and then you answered it in your answer, but it feels like by creating everything into a token with monetary value, that feels like I don't know if wrong is the right word, but it gives me a gut feeling of like, okay, are we just trying to make money off every little thing that ever exists ever? And that kind of from a noise perspective, right? We talked about the amount of media noise that's going on. That from a noise perspective, when you tie dollar values to that or euro or pound values to that, feels slightly predatory in a way from the perspective of people are already struggling to keep up. And now we're going to say, oh, by the way, we're going to also make this QR code on your whatever thing here worth $10. And if you don't sell it, then blah, 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 you're leaving money on the table, etc. So it gives me confidence that you're talking about the value or what the actual value is of these things and why you're doing it. And that makes total sense to me. Um, did you want to touch base on the merger and going on to the doing the IPO at all with Animoca?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few weeks back, we announced that we're doing a reverse merger with Currency, which are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So that it was an MOU, and over the course of this year, we'll be moving towards that. So I think that's big news. Again, the Nasdaq, the US is where it's at, if you like, and Animoca being one of the leading powers in Web3, one of the leading figures and companies in Web3, it makes sense for us to be listed on the biggest stock exchange that there is. That's probably all I can say as well,
Yeah,
as of
yeah,
now.
fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. Did you want to touch base on the lab part as well, or do you want to move to the open campus?
Oh, I can touch base very quickly on
Okay,
labs. So
sure.
as part of the evolution, we've spoken about tokenomics, we've spoken about Bitcoin, we've spoken about loads of tokens launching and failing and hypothesis testing. One of the biggest learnings that's come out from my years in the industry, at least with the point where we're at now, is when we think of tokens and digital assets, they're a product within their own right, and they need a product suite. And what we're finding, and I mentioned this earlier, is founders and builders are building solutions for traditional sense, but the user base they're onboarding is a crypto user base. So there's a big mismatch there. So the idea with Animoca Labs really is to incubate the right founders and help them take their products to market, regardless if it's a traditional product or if it's a crypto native product. So they can actually find product market fit, they can scale, they can grow, and they can be successful. That's one side of it. The other side of it is innovation in the space moves very quickly because there's new technological there's new what's the right way to phrase it, yeah, there's new technological advancements happening all the time, and it's at that point, well, how can there be a use case of this technology to showcase that it solves a problem? So the other part of it will be an innovation hub as well, where we're trying to find these new use cases or leveraging brand new use cases to showcase that there's PMF there as well. So that's going to be the focus of labs, which for me is a natural evolution of what tokenomics was, because
Yeah.
we did it at Animoca, it was mainly advisory. So you come in as a consultant. And as a consultant, I can tell you stakeholders have many other voices in their ears and they tend to take part of the advice, not all of the advice, which then has an impact on launch. So at least in this model, we come in as co-builders, not as advisors,
Mm.
which is part of the reason for the evolution as well.
That seems promising on the face of it. I think it's a good because there's a lot of people with a lot of ideas out there, and if they get the backing of a big kind of company and the insights of a big company and the capital and that sort of thing, it could be. I think. I mean, sounds good on the face of it for sure. Um, Real quickly before we go to open campus, when people are looking at like, I'll say altcoins, maybe is the word. What should people be looking at? Because to me and to people that I've talked to, it seems kind of hit and miss, right? If you go ask, like I've asked ChatGPT, I'm like, hey, what are some altcoins that might go to the moon and that I can just like pop 50 bucks into and not worry about it? And it gives me an answer and I'm like, okay, cool. And I didn't look any further into it. But what should people be looking at in terms of, because it seems like a lot of it is momentum, right? We've seen with Elon and Dogecoin that becomes a big joke all the time, which I personally find funny that he is spending time sending things into space and then also still has the time to make memes online. Um, but what should people be looking at in terms of if they are going to invest in some kind of crypto, what are some good markers for maybe promising one that is promising long term, that is not just going to be based on a joke or a meme or momentum or things like that?
I honestly feel it comes back to the definition of value. Like if you're just looking at financial value, then that's really when you need to be looking either at the fundamental analysis side of things or the technical analysis side of things and where we are in the market cycle. Is this the meta? And so on and so forth. But if you truly, and I mean, fundamentally, why a lot of people go into crypto was to make money. I feel where we're at now is actually the other forms of value as well. Like you could be a doctor, for example. There is a project out there with a cryptocurrency that is enabling things for you and what you do. And by joining that community and actually owning some of that token, what you do is you become a pseudo owner in that protocol or a pseudo owner in that operating system, if you like, just by the token ownership that you have. And in some of these instances, they have things called DAOs. DAO is just a funky term. It stands for decentralized autonomous organization. All it means is that there's some kind of governance structure that people can govern this protocol or this operating system. So actually, you do have ownership in a direction that it's going. So it's always good to give traditional examples steeped in tradition. And Uber is a great example. If I was an early Uber driver, um, I got no upside. If anything, I was worse off because I had more upside at the beginning when they were acquiring drivers. And then slowly, as they started to hit critical mass, they were giving less and less or charging more and more, if you like, of a fee for people to be able to use Uber. And then they IPO'd, the execs got rich, the early investors got rich or made bank, if you like, but all of the early drivers were left with zero. They managed to get no upside in Uber. Now imagine Uber when it launched at the beginning, it was actually Uber coin. So me as an early driver in Uber, I'm earning Uber coin. Me as an early user of Uber, I'm earning Uber coin. As Uber begins to grow, I get to take part in that growth of that network effect because more capital is coming in because there's more users coming in and using Uber for the way it's meant to be used. And
Hmm.
I feel that's the mental model when I talk about value that we have to be thinking about it. Yes, if I'm an Uber driver, owning Uber coin makes sense because I'm an integral part of that flywheel, of that economic framework that actually brings more value to Uber coins in this hypothetical situation. So coming back to your question, if I'm just wanting to invest and leave, good luck because then it is a casino at that point.
Hmm.
Unless you're investing in a Bitcoin, you're investing in an Ethereum, you're investing in something with fundamentals where you actually believe in the fundamentals and it's something that you can then join and be an active participant within that ecosystem. Those would be the projects, and this is not financial advice whatsoever, but those would be the projects or tokens that you'd be more inclined to invest in because you're actually being an active participant within that ecosystem versus I'm a trader or I'm an investor on buying something with the sole goal of it going up and giving me an ROI purely from a financial sense without me having to do any work for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how difficult is it for, or how would you advise, not financial advice, but how would you if somebody asked you the best way to maybe sift through um this one has fundamentals and this one doesn't, what are some things to look for?
I'd look for a roadmap is a good one, and seeing what's been achieved from the roadmap, because that will showcase that there's been growth and success. Partnerships, or more so strategic partnerships, are important. There's a lot of partnerships happening where people are just using each other's names to try and grow without any actual partnership happening below the surface. So looking at strategic partnerships, also looking at, have there been any further capital raises, because that will showcase that if there's an appetite in the market for something like this and who's come in. And we spoke earlier around digital asset treasuries, which is fundamentally listed companies buying some tokens and putting it on their balance sheet. So if a project has that, that means there might be some more institutional appetite, which can open up doors for adoption as well. So I think they'd be some of the frameworks I'd look at. I think if we just look at it from a technical analysis perspective, most tokens are down over 90%, especially those that launched 2 or 3 years ago, where they captured the upside of the market, but because it wasn't built on sound economic principles and it was more so around speculation, you saw a big drawdown in price. Um, but for me, that's some of these assets are not going to recover, and other assets were overvalued at the time, and now they found their true value. So looking at a graph might actually be misleading.
Mm,
But at the same time, if something is 99% down, it doesn't mean you're going to make those thousands and thousands of X's for it to get back to its previous all-time high, which I know from a psychological aspect, again, it works both ways. If you look at a chart that's down heavily, you think, right, it's down bad. I'd rather support something where there's momentum and there's upside. Um, but then the other side is, if it's down 99%, it doesn't mean it's going to go back to the previous all-time highs, because we've seen tokens, like you mentioned, Definity and ICP, a great example. When they launched, I think at launch, one token was about $700 at all-time high. They were insanely overvalued at the time. And now the token's sitting at like $5, $6, I think, when I checked maybe a couple of weeks ago. So
yeah,
that's
somewhere around there.
yeah. So it's down 99%. Does it mean the token will hit $700 anytime soon? Probably not. Can it hit 2 to 3x that because there's fundamentals within the projects and they've continued to build and ship product? Maybe. But again, that's just an example, not financial advice. I'd also, I mean, it depends. Like if you're someone who's coming in with I don't know, 1 to 10K, the way you allocate is very different if I'm coming in and I've got 6, 7, 8 figures in terms of what is my capital allocation. Am I going mainly in Bitcoin because that's the least volatile of all the assets? Am I someone who's looking to turn $100 into $100,000? So I'm going to be playing the meme coin game again, which is a casino and purely gambling. So it really depends on what the core driver is and what the appetite for risk is as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I mentioned to Samir, the guy he's a hedge fund guy that's a little bit bearish on crypto generally. I was like, yeah, I understand why you'd be that on all the coins except for like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like that because that's what it is. It's speculation. Um okay, let's you want to talk about Open Campus and what it is and what you got going on with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Sorry, I just had to send a message to let them know I'm not going to be attending the call that's on now. Sorry about that. Open Campus. So Open Campus actually started as an idea when I was being interviewed for the tokenomics role, where Yat, who's the chairman and founder of Animoca Brands, given my teaching background, we spoke heavily about education, but we didn't quite know what we were going to do in education. Like Open Campus didn't exist back then. In 2022, we acquired an edtech company called TinyTap. And what TinyTap were doing it was very simple. They had a no-code solution for teachers to create gamified content. Parents and schools would pay a subscription fee, and they'd share some of those fees with the content creators, with the teachers. And this was a traditional business model. They were generating revenue at the time. I don't think they were profitable. So we ended up acquiring TinyTap, and we looked at their core model and we tokenized it. And what I mean by we tokenized it is we looked at the courses or the content that was generating the most revenue. And you can argue that it was generating revenue based on the payments that were being made back. And we treated it like any revenue generating business. It generates X, the value of this business is 3X or 4X or 5X. And this is where the blockchain technology came in. We wrapped that future revenue to be generated in an NFT. Again, coming back to an NFT is a digital container. We wrapped future revenue in this NFT. We took a leaf out of the music industry that anyone buying this NFT is actually coming in as a co-publisher. So the onus is on them to help co-publish this material so we can generate more revenue. This was a proof of concept. We ended up selling 12 of these NFTs, 6 in November and 6 in December of 2022. We raised over $400,000. And just to give context, this is at a time when the crypto market had died completely.
Yeah.
This is like the depth of a bear market. We'd raised over $400,000. And this is the beautiful part. Half of that went to the teachers themselves. So we had an elementary school teacher in the US. She walked away with just over $36,000. And for us, this was the innovation. There was clearly something here where we were able to put control back in the hands of teachers, but also be able to reward them for the efforts that they've made in terms of, at least in this small use case of creating content on the TinyTap platform. So with that as a proof of concept, again, with the market being dead, there was a lot of appetite around this new education thing that Animoca was building. Fast forward to April of 23, we launched the EDU token. So EDU is for education, and we wanted to keep it broad. And we launched it as a DAO. So coming back to this governance structure that we were speaking about. And the reason why we launched it that way is what DAOs tend to have is a treasury, which is your balance sheet in a company. This is your treasury. And anyone who holds the tokens can make proposals to the DAO to say, all right, I want funding of X amount to do X, Y, and Z. And we use that as a means to find the right partners to come in, where there was consensus from the community that these were the right partners. So one of the very first proposals that went through the DAO or went to the foundation was a $10 million global educator fund. And the reasoning behind it was simple. We had the proof of concept of TinyTap. We knew there was an appetite from teachers. So let's create this big fund. And this is the beauty of having a token and it having monetary value, is you can actually take advantage of that and use that monetary value to fund things, versus it not having any monetary value. So this is the pro side of using crypto in this case, outside of the volatility. So that proposal was made. It got passed. We now had this $10 million global educator fund, but we had the problem. We had minimal distribution to teachers. The only teachers we were able to onboard were teachers from the TinyTap platform, and they were all elementary school teachers because that's what TinyTap was aimed at. And it was also our only distribution platform. And so what we ended up having were people who were not really teachers creating content that was not really fit for purpose. So we realized there's a big mismatch here. We need distribution. We need an ecosystem, and we need more partners. So we ended up repurposing that $10 million global educator fund into an accelerator. And the purpose of the accelerator was to onboard different educational technology companies, regardless if they're building in the traditional sense or if they're building in Web3. So we can start growing out a portfolio or an ecosystem. So that was probably one of the most important first steps that we made. And in doing so, we partnered with New Campus, who are running the accelerator for us. They're now core contributors to the Open Campus ecosystem. And what we have just through the accelerator as of today is over 60 companies that have been funded by Open Campus. This varies from outfits that are training or retraining existing programmers to be able to code in blockchain programming languages like Solidity and Rust, for example. So that was a big one for us. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have a guy who has taken 2 banks from 0 to 1, who his bread and butter is, again, growing banks. And what he wants to do is his passion project, which is financial literacy. So now we have someone who is well respected at least within Europe, within the banking sector, who is part of our ecosystem. And that's unlocked so many doors for us as well. So it's, when we think about education, and I don't want to use the word education is broken and we're fixing education, but if we're looking at how we can iterate and improve the education ecosystem, it's not one project or one business that can do that. It's a conglomeration of so many different partners fixing or improving so many different parts of what's broken within the education flywheel. And that's the approach that we ended up having to go for because it was too big a task for us. It was too big a mountain for us to climb by ourselves. Fast forward to today, on the institution side, we have Sparkle Holding, which is a holding company, which is sorry, a Nasdaq listed company. They've acquired $3 million of our token with a view to acquire up to $50 million over the next 2 years. That announcement was made last month, so we have 23 months left of that, and they've already acquired the first 3 million. Now, for them, why? Why does this make sense? Well, we've built solid foundations. We have partnerships with a lot of the top universities and some of their blockchain and AI ecosystems within the universities as well. We have brought $1 million as a proof of concept of student financing on chain. What does that actually mean? It means you can see the financing, you can see who's getting the financing, you can see the repayment rates. And we've aimed this in Southeast Asia, so in the Philippines to begin with. One of the biggest challenges is actually access to financing there, where there is no access to financing through a traditional sense. So they have to go to loan sharks. And loan sharks are charging 40, 50% plus. I want to say plus, it's not just plus more money, it's plus the headache you get from taking money from loan sharks as well. So there was an opportunity there. We've brought $1 million of loans on chain. We're looking to expand in the region. A lot of countries within that region have mandates for not just student loans, but also verifiable credentials. And this was actually, I should have mentioned this a lot earlier. One of the first things we solved for was how can we bring credentials on chain? So how can we make sure that they're immutable and you can showcase that you have the learning? Like you said, you've been looking on my LinkedIn. I could have put on my LinkedIn, I've been to Harvard, I've been to
Yeah.
Oxford, I've been to Cambridge. How can you verify? You can't. And LinkedIn has no verification process or no official verification process that covers everyone on their platform as of now. Unlike Twitter, might have like, or X might have like the little gold tick to prove you are the business you say you are. LinkedIn doesn't, at least to my knowledge, have an equivalent. So how can we showcase that some of the existing credentialing can be put on chain to showcase I am who I say I am, but also I have the skills that I say I have. But then the other side of it is how can we capture skills that are not captured in a conventional sense? So you might work for a Microsoft and there's some kind of upskilling that takes place. Great, but there's no certificate for me per se. How can we capture that? How can we capture that I've been in an environment where I've learned something to showcase that learning is there? And sort of going back to what we were saying maybe half an hour ago, that there's a mismatch between students leaving university and employers finding the right skill sets. Well, all of a sudden now, what you have fundamentally is in the same way you have a credit score, you have your credential score based on all of the different learnings that I have from my degrees to all of the smaller bits of learnings that I've made, which actually, when you link it to student financing, you're able to give much better financing deals based on data.
Hmm.
And when we went to university, and I'm assuming you took a loan out on your degree, and it's fine if you didn't, but it's a blanket for everyone. The only thing the universities know is this was my GPA, maybe in the States, or my A levels in the UK. That's it. And this is the university I want to go to. And my name and my address. There's zero other data points to showcase why our loans should be different. Or if I'm someone doing higher education, or maybe let's flip it. Maybe we go to the employment side and say, employers, what skill sets are you looking for? These are the skill sets we're looking for. So now we can curate a this doesn't exist yet, but it is something in the roadmap. Now you can create a learning experience. So you're actually fitting the supply and the demand. The demand is coming from the employers. The supply is the students. And all right, these students have the base level of knowledge. These are the extra knowledge that they need. And you start training students specific for employers' needs. And from that perspective, and this is something I've put a lot of thought into because I'm against debt, especially when it comes to student financing. How can we find more equitable ways to fund learning? Recruitment. Recruiters make a killing on placing people into work. What if you eliminated the recruiter because you have your on-chain CV, if you like, your on-chain credit
Hmm.
learning, and you're actually any funding that's given out, you're using the recruitment or the money that would go to the recruiters to actually start paying back some of these loans or doing income shared agreements. So actually, it's a loan, but it's at 0%, and it's done in an equitable way so that a student taking out financing isn't graduating in tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, stressed out, stressed that they can't find work. All right, I'm already in this much debt. How am I going to get married? How am I going to have a kid? How am I going to get a mortgage? How am I going to buy a car? It just creates a mindset that is that is actually not conducive to society or growth whatsoever. Whereas what we want to be, and I think this is something Trump spoke about, is we want more entrepreneurs. We want people thinking
Yep.
in a slightly different way. So there needs to be a shift in that. And open campus, and this is me waffling, but open campus, the way we're thinking about it is it's an operating system. And in the same way, when everyone first downloaded Microsoft, you had your Word, you had your Excel, you had Paint, you had basic apps within there. The basic apps we have as of today are your on-chain credentialing, access to student financing, at least the core primitive of that. And then we've got so many others building different solutions within our ecosystem through the accelerator that I was speaking about as well. So the North Star, if you like, is how can we democratize access to education for everyone? And that's what we're working to slowly. We also know education is not sexy. Everyone says we need education, it's important, but ask people to put time or money where their mouth is, and it's not the sexiest narrative at that point. So it's how can we make education sexy as well? And how
Mm,
can we get into the 21st century? Again, we've seen vibe coding. Like as of today, if I have an idea, I can spend a few hours with one of the vibe coding platforms and I can spit out a website that, from a functionality perspective, is quite functional. Maybe the design isn't the best, but I can prove a concept quite quickly. And I feel we're still teaching Pythagoras' theorem in school. It's just like, well, when is a kid ever going to use Pythagoras? Yes, they need to understand the logic behind it because it unlocks neural pathways. But we can't just be teaching for that. We need to be teaching for the future as well.
yeah. If teachers want to get involved in this, or like a school system wants to get involved in this, how would the best way for them to approach that be?
I'd say visit the website opencampus.xyz. It is tailored for more the Web3 centric community. So if it doesn't make sense at the beginning, apologies for that. Bear with it and just go to the more info or just send us an email at info@opencampus.xyz. I think we're trying to do a lot. We're looking for partners. And I think, again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Education isn't an industry that is going to be improved by one project or one business. It's going to take a lot of us working together to see meaningful change. And we are the biggest education protocol or education operating system that exists as of today. And for this to be successful, we need the right partners to grow and scale.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Do you have any other kind of crypto Web3 thoughts before we waffle about football for 10 minutes to close this
Absolutely.
thing out?
Crypto Web3 thoughts. I mean, the biggest use case as of today outside of Bitcoin as a store of value or digital gold has been stable coins. Again, we mentioned how quickly transactions are sent. It solves a lot of the cross-border challenges that are there when you're transferring money. And I feel while crypto has been slagged off a lot and there's a lot of negativity because there have been bad actors in the space, that's not representative of what the technology enables. It's the same way as saying, well, dollars are bad because I can use dollars to buy guns and buy drugs and things like that. Well, it doesn't make the dollar bad. It just means the dollar is being used in a nefarious way. Similar with crypto. Oh, people using crypto on the black market back in the day to buy drugs and buy passports or whatever. Well, you do that with most currencies
Yeah.
anyway. But that's not a reason for crypto being bad. It is more the case of how can, and what we're seeing, like I mentioned with Revolut as a neobank, how can you leverage some of the technology as an enabler in business, as
Mm,
an enabler in what people are doing. And I think that's the mindset that needs to change versus how can I buy a token and it's going to make me 10x or 100x, which is still there, but we've attracted too many speculators into the space, which is why we're seeing a lot of zero sum thinking, which is why crypto has been called scammy because it's all about how much money I make versus how can we leverage these assets to grow an ecosystem together so that we all win, which is more of a blue ocean mindset.
yeah. Makes total sense. Makes total sense. All right. Who's your team that you
Oh,
support?
Liverpool. Big Liverpool
Liverpool.
fan. Yeah, big
So
Liverpool fan.
what's going on over there, man? You got Salah is kind of seem unhappy, and you guys started the season very, very well. I think it's like 6 wins on the bounce, and then or something like that, 6 or 7, and
Yeah.
then drop off. What's going
I
on?
We had big changes to the squad. So Liverpool under Klopp was very. It wasn't about possession, even though that the way it seemed. It was more about how can we counter press? How can
Hmm.
we counter press, win the ball further up the field, and punish teams early or hit teams on the counter attack? And that always meant you defended from the front. So in the last season, you had Nunes, you had Diaz, and you had Salah. They were your focal three at the front, and all three loved to press. And you could see Diaz pressing, Nunes pressing, and then you've sold on Diaz, you've sold on Nunes, you've brought in Florian Ritz, you've brought in Isaac, you've brought in Ikatike. We're trying to change the way that we play to how we played when we had Coutinho. You have that free roam number 10, so to speak, and that's meant to be Florian Ritz's position. But you've got it a lot of the team, and you haven't had that transition process. And some of these players didn't have a preseason in the case of Alexander Isak. So you've got a lot of changes happening and you're trying to change the system. And I feel the wins we got, half of them were like goals in like the 82nd, 83rd minute plus. In the last 10 minutes of a game, we managed to score the winning goal. I felt that was just more luck and more fear that teams carried from the previous season because of how well we were playing. But if you look at the end of last season as well, we'd started to drop off. We'd won the
Yeah.
league, wrapped up the league by a few games early, but the drop off was there. It was clear to see. It was inherent, and we that's continued, especially with the changes. So I feel with any transition, especially when you got half the team, it takes time. But what you don't do is bench your best players and you don't try and change the system in one go. You have to slowly change that system over the course of the season. And I feel that's the mistake that Slot has made. He's wanting to build the team around Florian Ritz, which makes a lot of sense. But prior to that, your team was built around Salah, was built around
Hmm.
your Gary McAllister's, was built around different players, still with a team ethic there. And that's what we'd lost. And there's bias here. Again, I come from I'm Egyptian. Salah is Egyptian as well, which is not the reason why I support Liverpool, but it was an added bonus. But when you see someone like Gakpo playing week in, week out on the left wing
Hmm.
and not producing the numbers, he's actually detrimental because you get the fullback with the overlapping run and it's never played into the fullback, makes the fullback look bad. And then you continue to play him and then you bench your superstar, who's been the most consistent forward in the league for the past 7 or 8 years, who doesn't even play in a centre forward position, who plays on the wing, yet has put numbers better than most forwards over the past 10 years. That to me doesn't make sense. And that to me, when Salah came out and said what he said, it was very strategic. He doesn't say much to the
Hmm.
media. When he does, there's always a reason behind it. He also said he's been thrown under the bus. I don't feel he was aiming at the manager with that comment. I actually feel that when he signed his new contract over the summer, that was for twofold. Number one, so Liverpool don't lose him for free, but also number two, he can continue to play, showcase his value, and then they can actually sell him for some money later on. And he didn't expect that, or he wasn't expecting that the Liverpool, and none of this is official, by the way, just through some back channels, um, that Liverpool are going to try sell him in the January transfer window, while he still has value. And I think that's
Mm.
what by the term I'm being thrown under the bus or I'm being scapegoated because they want to move him on to
Yeah.
monetize his value.
I mean, it's a tough scenario, right? I get it from his perspective and then from the club's perspective. Of course, they don't want to lose him for free, but at the same time, he's a legend there, so you got to treat it with some kind of delicacy as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I also think to me it's strange that Chiesa is not getting more minutes. He's a super good player in my opinion. But yeah, like you said, the transition period is going to take time. It almost feels like Slot is going to set up for kind of a three in the back type with Frimpong one side, Kirkez on the other, and then the two strikers with Isak and Ekitike, and
Yeah.
then Verts in the free role kind of behind them is almost what it feels like to me is where he's shaping the squad. And then of course, if he wants to shape the squad that way, then there's not really a place for Salah unless you put him at one of the striker spots, and then but you spent big money on the other two strikers, and then so Yeah, it's a tough scenario for sure. But Liverpool's always got. I'm a Dortmund fan, so when Klopp was there for a while, I had soft spot for them for sure. But yeah, I'm hoping you guys turn it around because the club itself is like amazing in so many ways. So, I mean, it's been interesting to watch for sure. So, I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think th things are looking better more recently. Yeah, he does want to move to three in the back. I agree with that, but we missed out on Gehi on the
Yep.
final day. So we don't have the numbers to play that system, which is why it's a bit strange while you're trying to change the system at the front without having the support of the system at the back to give you that fluidity that you need in the system he wants to play. So for me, it's like you're pushing it too early. You're making changes when we don't even have the right players fit. Isaac is not fit. He's not match fit.
No.
He's to play. He's not match sharp, maybe, and you can see that he doesn't have the confidence. So you don't play with Isaac at the beginning. You bring him. You play him so he can bring back his confidence, firing on all cylinders. You try and address the centre back situation over January, and then you transition over the course of the season.
Hmm.
But again, what do I know? I just launch tokens and help.
Well, I don't know. That's why they pay Slot the big bucks, and we're just sitting here. We're just sitting here for sure.
I mean, we're like armchair
Yeah.
managers with our opinions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
you're a football fan. Check out One Football. So we're doing a lot of. We've been working with them for the past 3, 4 years in terms of looking at what we can tokenize, looking at the fan engagement, things like that. So check out One Football. We've been working with them for a while.
Okay.
There will be a crypto element there. Again, mainly around the community and how we can really tap into that. So when I was speaking about different forms of value, we're trying to apply that there. And also when we think about rewards as a football fan, you'd rather get signed merchandise, tickets to a game versus $50 in crypto
Yeah.
from a standpoint. So I think that's something you can resonate with. And I feel, I know I'm bringing it back to crypto again, but that's what's been missing is we're pushing crypto in people's faces to make money. We're not pushing it in the form of something they enjoy doing. And then
Yeah.
they have that discovery, so to speak. And I feel there's more of that coming in the next 6, 12, 18 months, where you won't even realize it's crypto or blockchain on the back end.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I'd love to get tickets to a World Cup game. FIFA, bring your prices down, please. More than the. Anyways.
In Santino, you're taking the piss, mate.
Yeah. Anyways, without at the risk of going down another rabbit hole, I know you got to get out of here, so we'll can it there. Um, do you have a last few thoughts, Mo, before we get you out of here?
I think I need to say a question for the next guest.
Yeah, that's a surprise. We'll say it
Yeah.
offline.
Oh, okay, sorry, my bad. Oh, is that offline? Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
offline,
My bad.
offline. So you
My
got any
bad.
last
Sorry.
nickels before we get you out of here?
Last questions. If you have any questions for me, I think you guys share my handles and things as well. Please reach out. I don't bite. I promise. Crypto is not bad. There's just bad actors in the space. We need to change education, and we can only do that together. And we need to have a growth mindset, just in general. We really need to start thinking about how we can add value to society for society to grow. Because I feel like some of the things we've discussed today are bigger than crypto and bigger than technology in terms of where society is headed, especially in the West.
100%, 100%. Mo, appreciate your time. MK, thank you for popping in. Appreciate you setting this up.
Sure.
For those who are interested in learning more, links will be in the description as always. And we thank you guys for listening, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.